God is in me, God is in me, God is in me, God is with me, God is with me, God is with me, God works through me. And people believe that now. God works through me, God works through me, God is for me, God is for me, and God is for me. And where God is, I said there can be no failures. I have to talk about my mama, which is Margaret O'Neill, and my grandmother, which was Katie Girton. Katie Girton was a sainted woman. She taught us everything we knew in the home there. I was raised in the home where I was born, right there at 14th and Mill Street in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana.
Katie raised all of us, including Melvin. She was the one that was the homemaker, and my mother, Margaret, was the one that went out to work. So Mama took care of all of us. Melvin knew nothing but Mama.
He said, can any good thing come off of 14th Street? Well, I came off of 14th Street. It was not the best living conditions because I was born in a two-room house. And you know what a two-room house is. So the living room, which somehow became the main room for the house, it was also the sleeping room.
Mama worked for uh, some school teacher. She would bring home, and a lot of times you heard Reverend preach about he's had all the delicious food because Mama would bring it home. He had the shrimp. We didn't know anything about that. Mama get through, Mr. Moore let her take all that food home, and we was never hungry.
I started there in the home and started with my mother going to church, with my grandmother going to church, and I grew up singing in the choir of the Gethsemane Baptist Church, where my mother was a strong alto singer in the choir. Reverend Vance then was the minister of that church. It was not located where it is now, but it was down on North Street. When I started going to school, of course, in the neighborhood, the kids went to another church, and I started going to the church BTU with the other kids in the neighborhood. That's how I got connected then with the 17th Street Baptist Church. All of my life, I guess, have been in the gaze of Gethsemane Baptist Church, New Baptist Church, and 17th Street Baptist Church. And I fell in love with 17th Street Baptist Church because of the kids in the neighborhood. That's where they all went to. I became a member of the 17th Street Baptist Church when I was 11 years old. And I was baptized. Then we did not have a pool in the church. I was baptized at the Mount Olive Baptist Church over on Blake Street. And that's where my Christian growth grew just as a kid, growing up through the Sunday school, through the training union, through the junior choir. I never can forget those sponsors that we had over the youth work at 17th Street Baptist Church. And then when Reverend married Mrs. Edwards, when she came to be the first lady of our church from Kansas City, Kansas, my growth really started because she saw something and she nurtured me. And I learned how to do everything in the church through Sister Edwards' instruction and teaching and tutoring. She saw that I was kind of gifted in church work, and she guided me along the way, along with him.
I grew up at the old church, 17th and Northwestern. Many happy memories of the old church as well as coming to 1001 Eugene Street in 1955.
There was no father in the home. And when my mother got married, I was 18 years old, older than 18 years old. So they looked up to me as their father.
He was our pastor, father, brother. He had to fulfill those roles as pastor, father, brother. And he did it in such a unique way that we did not take for granted any of those titles that he had.
My earliest recollections are trying to separate the roles that my brother played for me as my oldest brother, as actually a father figure and as pastor. And he was such a leader that he was always encouraging us to lead. And at the same time, there were moments when he would say, but not so fast. And I always had a desire to please him, to do the things that would make him proud of me as his sister. And I didn't always know whether I was on the mark or not, because he's not a guy who would necessarily say, hey, good job, or, keep going. And it's out of his silence that you had to discern his facial expressions, his body language, whether you were on the right track.
And of course, my mother worked at that time at Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. And so I would be there in the evening when they got out of school.
He'd be the person who would show up with my mother or make sure that my mother had a way to get to a program or something at school. And so he was always, by his presence, affirming his support, not necessarily by the words that came out of his mouth. Mm-hmm. Or when it was time to go away to college, he never let me come home without pressing a piece of money in my hand to make sure I had a book or gas money or whatever it was. So it was always knowing that he was present. And even though he was my big brother, he was still the strongest male image in my family, notwithstanding that, I knew my father.
I first started my pastorate in 1961 at the Little Zion Baptist Church over on the east side. And I loved that church, Little Zion. It was a family church, the Thomases. It was padlocked when I went there. And I stayed there for 2 years. And when Reverend Edwards died in 1963, he had met with me and told me I had to come home because he was sick and that he wanted me to come home with him because when he died, he just knew that I would be the next pastor.
One thing Reverend George Love was in the spot of assistant pastor, but not by name. Because Reverend Edwards had already stated after Pastor Girton had left Christ Missionary that he was not going to name another assistant pastor.
And so I told him I couldn't do it. I wanted to stay with my church. He said, no, you can't. I said, well, Rev, let me stay till January. And so we became in agreement that I would stay until January the 1st of 1964. But however, he and Reverend Shiffens had been out, and Mrs. Edwards was out of town. And when he went to bed on October the 8th, 1963, he didn't wake up. After Reverend's funeral, they had their first meeting, and Sister Kirk, I remember her words, we don't have to search for no pastor. Our pastor left us a pastor. And so we called Reverend Girton, and that's when the havoc broke out. And so 6 months later, they did call me, April the 16th, 1964, to become the shepherd of this flock, and all the joy that came to me that night. And I'm still happy about it.
what we needed at that time was new spiritual growth. And he brought back with him the spirit of being a church family, the spirit of being able to communicate one with another and have the proper church fellowship that we needed.
Nobody can love these people anymore than Melvin Girton because I grew up with them, raised with them.
The church began to be more serious about the completeness of church, not just preaching, teaching, music, but the whole aspect of what the church is all about.
I would hate to work because I wanted to be at church. So anytime we had an afternoon, I was right here. I just love church. God's been good to our family.
You could see the church picking up. You could see the fellowship becoming more spiritual, and also the fact that he was bringing back into the church what he had his presence being away brought back into it. It was like a son coming back home and the family being reconnected. And that was very much needed.
I've seen the people grow spiritually. I've seen the people get married and have children of their own. And so it's just a happy relationship here for 50 years.
When a church takes on leadership, when a pastor takes on leadership, members begin to change. They're not just everyday humdrum, just going to church on Sunday. We begin to pick up on what it really means to be a Sunday school teacher, what it really means to be associate minister, or even an assistant pastor. You begin to pick up on those things. Ushers pick up on how to be ushers, how to dress, there were so many things that ushered in, that made the church unique, made even other churches want to copy.
I pastored loving people, walking people through their experiences, and I'm glad that they trust me and they talk to me about whatever they're going through, and that's just the way I have developed my ministry.
This is actually the only church that I've ever been a member of in this city after being here now about 46 years. So it's been fantastic. Our relationship has been one that's dynamic. I think it's tried to be copied from other pastors with deacons over the city.
Some Sundays you would know that he was just talking to you to encourage you. The way he surrounded you with people who were, that you might have not known you were going to need access to, but he was putting you in what we now call the network that would help support you, to build foundations for you, connecting dots for you. So he was always a person who was able to make a way out of no way. When you didn't know how you were going to make it, he would be there.
A lot of people think I know just because I'm sitting under the leadership of Dr. Girton. That has led me to district layman president, state layman president, and on to national work. Not because that I have been so good in those areas, but just because the high clout of Pastor Girton and what he has meant to the city and to our extended work in district, state, and national level.
Too many of us who are Christians don't understand what love, real love really is. And I don't know that I've ever hugged or kissed Melvin. God forbid now he has started maybe. But I love him. I call him 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And he says he's listening to me when I know he's asleep most of the time. But he happens to say yes or no at the right time. And it's been that kind of a relationship with he and his family.
When I had my knee surgery, I had to be at the hospital at 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, when I got to the hospital, Reverend Girton was already there, sitting there waiting on me. He stayed there through the surgery, come back later on that evening. I guess I didn't even know he was there. Left me a note, told me I've been here, everything's going to be all right. He and Mrs. Girton have really been a blessing in my life. Not only that, I've had death in my family. Reverend Girton was always there, have an encouraging word to say, look up. It's a brighter day ahead.
I've seen and buried people that I grew up with, their mothers, their fathers, even some of them. Some of my best friends, Paul Terry. We grew up together. He was the chief treasurer, the chief trustee of this church, Joseph Motley. He lived across the street to me. I buried his mama and then buried everybody in his family. They all, and some of them, they're still here. Their grandchildren are here.
I think back to when my granddaughter was born. Jackie was at the hospital in labor, and we were waiting, and it was getting kind of late. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to go. This baby doesn't come on. But Rev gets up and takes off his coat and hangs it across the chair. And I thought, well, if he can stay and she's just his member, she's my child, surely I can stay until the baby comes.
The demonstration of love is what I think would be one of those seeds that grew in our family, a family that's not terribly demonstrative, but yet that demonstration came through the being available to each other and being willing to stand together in hard times and make sure that everybody knew that they were covered, so to speak. And I've always felt covered in the relationship with my brother, even though there were times that I was saying, he just doesn't get it.
I remember him telling me one thing. I had a quit fire situation. I don't know if you know what a quit fire is. It means you're gonna get fired if you don't quit. I had one of those kind of situations, and he came to me, and he said to me, he says, "Well, you know, you got more heart than I am, because I think than I have, because I would kind of slam them."
I've taught people how to drive cars, how to buy cars. I've been with them when buying homes and the counseling of our married couples. Oh Lord, I have buried couples that I've married, and so it's just been a joy. And I've told some members not to marry certain people, and some of them listen, some of them don't. Then some of them come back and say, "Rev, I should have listened," and all those kinds of things. But it's been a joy. It's been fulfilling to me to know that this is the place that God placed me and set me here to be the leaders of this congregation.
To watch them as they raise their family and their children grow, and to come along and to have them as the leaders here at Christ Missionary
it's just been an inspiration.
I cannot tell you the times Reverend Girton has thrown out a nugget in morning worship that has given me the title for a song or the basis of a song. And he said things that have spiritually erupted in me that has given me an opportunity to be a blessing through the music. And because I really understand the relationship of a minstrel to the pastor and how all of that should work together and in harmony, that the people in the congregation and the body of Christ at large can be blessed, because I understand that Reverend Girton was really a master at that.
I have been from Australia. I've served preached in Tokyo. I preached 15 days Haiti, and I've been Africa, Jerusalem. But everything that have come to me have come through the auspices and the love of the people of Christ Missionary Baptist Church. The biggest joy I have, I guess, when I think about my ministry here, to be able to say I lasted. I didn't faint. I didn't give up. I didn't worry, and I wasn't worried in well doing. And I think the reaping is going to come when I can conclude this ministry here at Christ Jesus. I just thank God for keeping me and using me in my right mind and pretty good health and strength, that I can, hopefully sit back and let somebody else take this church to higher height, deeper depths.
That I moved to Indianapolis in '60, and I already knew them. They're one of the few people that I knew here in Indianapolis. And then after being here and going to work for about 3 weeks, lo and behold, who walks into the store but Laura Girton, and who walks into the store but Melvin Girton? And then there we are, we struck up again, and they discovered that I was here. I discovered that this was the area that they were in, and I think this was near the time, if not past the time, that he had just become pastor of this church.
Melvin is just there, but it's a delightful there. It's a there with love and sincere friendship right there. And he looks at you and says, well, I ain't going no place. You can get mad if you want. He doesn't care. I get mad with him. Yes, I get mad with him. I have gotten mad with him. It doesn't bother him. He gets mad with him. But we both know it won't last. See? He's a wonderful person. He is. He is. No airs. No pretense. I'm Melvin. Here I am. You either accept me or reject me.
He encouraged me. We did all the spiritual things. He always wanted the best for me, always encouraged me to do the work that the Lord had called me to do, but at the same time, we could joke and sit down at the barbecue table together, or sit down and have dinners together, which was always fun to me. And then, of course, as he was living, and as Laura was living, and as she was birthing her children, and as other things were happening in terms of their role in the community, I got a chance to share with them. Reverend Girton became, a political activist, but yet not to the point that it was always you didn't see his work, that it overshadowed his work at the church. Reverend Girton, in terms of personal, if I needed a friend to talk to, if I needed someone for consolation, and this was before, again, my joining Christ Missionary Church. If I needed someone to strengthen or to just bounce off some thoughts that I might have had about this, that, or the other, Reverend Girton was always there, and we could talk about it.
Strauss was going out of business, and they had a markdown sale. Everything was 50%. And Pastor, if he see the word bargain, that really sets him to to the extreme. So there was some shoes on sale, 50% off. And they were like $200 shoes. So pastor said, it's a bargain. Then I wear 10 and a half and some shoes 11. And no way I could put my foot in a 9. He said, well, just wear them. And and we argued in the store, and everybody's laughing. But so that tells you how close that we have been.
We've traveled all over these United States. We've gone to the Bahamas many, many times, 2 or 3 times a year together. We were even together when 9/11 happened. It so happens I was in my room in the Bahamas, and I turned the radio on and got our church service about a pastor that Melvin and I both listened to. And I called him. I said, Melvin, come. I've got Reverend Cherry on the phone. And Melvin said, no, turn the TV. And with that time, we heard about the bombing, and we saw it from our suite in the Atlantis Hotel in the Bahamas. It's been that kind of closeness for over 40 years. I don't think you find it very often.
4608 is a dangerous community now. And so a church is needed in this neighborhood. There was a time that the kids in the neighborhood all came to this church. These kids that live in this neighborhood now don't go to no church. They just hang on corners. And it's sad to see people cross the street from the church not come to church. It was not like that when we moved up here. Folks was happy to have a church in the community. And when the highway came through, it dispersed. White churches moved out, and we purchased this church back there. Reverend Edwards did in 1955. So we've been in this location since 1955. When I speak, I don't speak for me. Number one, I speak hopefully from the direction that the Lord gives to my spirit, to my heart about conditions. I speak for my people. I'm not ashamed to go anywhere. I've been to court for my people. I've been to jail to visit any of my people. I love to serve them in all capacity.
And he was willing to go to jail himself to make sure that the lives of black young men in Indianapolis were not treated as unimportant. Long before Trayvon Martin, Melvin Girton was speaking up for young black men who were not respected in our society. Got in a lot of trouble politically for it, but he never backed down. And so that kind of courage, I guess that's another seed. Maybe that's a tree for me now, because he planted the seeds of courage in my spirit, that you have to be willing to speak up for those who are the most vulnerable, who cannot speak up for themselves, or who may not even know they need somebody to speak up for them. And then that also falls in the role of ministry. And it also falls in the teachings of Jesus.
I sign my name, servant, small s, of the big S, of the servant Lord. And that's what I want to be known for. I'm a servant for Jesus Christ. I'm the ecumenical pastor of the city of Indianapolis. Of course, I've been pastoring now longer than any other pastor in our community at this present time.
Where churches that were of a different faith didn't fellowship, I think he helped break those chains, because you saw him go to the Pentecostal church. Well, that was almost a no-no. You saw him fellowship. And when we got new ministers in the city, a lot of them became pastors simply because Pastor Girton opened those doors.
And Congressman Jacobs said to me one night down at the State House, and I never will forget it, said, Melvin, I'm glad to see you come in here. Said the whole tenor of this meeting today will change just because they see you here. And so it just means a lot. So that's how I became the vice president of the Billy Graham Crusade twice. So white preachers respected me, black preachers respected me. They called me the dean of preachers, and so I've had a good run with preachers. Not that it has always been easy. We've had some misunderstanding with some preachers, but they know if a preacher come to town and he's in trouble, they know to contact me.
Obviously, before that was a me, and before there were many others, that was a Reverend Girton, who also had a tremendous love for singing and was a singer, a great singer, singing with the B. Brown singers and others, and Mylan Brown, which was B's daughter. That was just a great love for singing on the part of Melvin, and Melvin wanted his church because he understood that there were a lot of pastors in our marketplace that while they enjoyed singing, they were not singing supporters as such. They didn't want a lot of programs. They didn't want to rent out the church. They didn't want to do a lot of this or that. But Melvin knew that singers needed a friend, and he became a friend to the singer.
I think twice we sold out this place and folks was hanging out the windows. Because I think one of the time was James Cleveland, and then Ed Hawk and Walter came to town, and they packed out this room. And so I just thank the Lord that these walls are strong, because we bursted them out many times with gospel singers in our midst. The mighty clouds of joy. Oh, how they used to rock this house when they would come to Indianapolis, Indiana.
He brought in a lot of preachers from different places. He introduced the city to Harold Smith and Majestics, to Charles Nix.
From the king of it all, Reverend James Cleveland, down to Isaac Douglas, down to Shirley Caesar, just you name them, and they came through the Christ Missionary Church. And Christ Missionary got a billing as far as the church in our community, for great gospel singing. So if you ask, where are you going this evening? You'd always say, well, what's over at Christ Missionary this afternoon? So it really was a great church, and were it not for his compassion, for the singers, even beyond the friendship, were it not for his compassion for singing and those who were out there in terms of building and developing singing, we would not have had such a great community for gospel artistry.
We had the Martin singers here. We had Dr. Dorsey here. Mahalia Jackson, she sang here. I was in Mahalia Jackson home many times when we were young people traveling to Chicago to sing and many other places. So James and Bobby Hopkins and Raymond Raspberry, all of those musicians that are now taking the long sleep, they were my good friends. Oh, James was my buddy. He used to be with the Luck Singers out of Chicago because we were kids together, young people, and James was a talented young boy at that time, and a great friend. In fact, he stayed in my home when we lived out on Missouri Street. He stayed in our home there when he was in town. That was before we started staying in these expensive hotels.
And Christ Missionary became a center of social justice. And I remember one of the nights that Jesse Jackson was coming. And I used to think Jesse Jackson was, like one of the most important people in the world because I heard him on the radio, Operation Push and Breadbasket and all of that. But they knew each other as friends. And so the intimidation that might have accompanied meeting some of the most important people in America in black leadership just wasn't there for me. I respected those people, but I wasn't afraid or uncomfortable in their presence because I'd seen them at church. I'd seen them in a very comfortable environment. God is in me, God is in me, God is in me. God is with me, God is with me, God is with me. God is for me, God is for me, God is for me. And where God is, there can be no failure.
God is in me, God is in me, God is in me, God is with me, God is with me, God is with me, God works through me. And people believe that now. God works through me, God works through me, God is for me, God is for me, and God is for me. And where God is, there can be, he used to say, uh, perfect. There can be, I say there can be no failures. There can be no imperfections, he used to say. But I changed that to there can be no failures. There can be no failure. Wherever God is. And I've had kids that go away from school and come back and tell me, Pastor, that benediction that you gave, that prayer that you gave, I say it every night, and I've been tempted to do this and tempted to do the other. But when I remember that God is in me and God is working through me, it saved me. It saved me from despair. And so it's a great scripture. It's a great scripture, and we say it every day here at Christ Missionary.
My dad has always been an incredible entrepreneur. He, of course, pastored the church, but there were a couple of entrepreneurial ventures that really stand out. One being Discovery, which was principally ran by Reverend Pullins, and the other was Christ Missionary Housing. What he showed me as a kid, just innately, subconsciously, I picked up the business parts of what my dad was doing. So from Discovery, I think, was my first job. You know, we'd ride our bikes through Crown Hill Cemetery, down 38th Street, across 44th Street, Meridian, and come to work every day. So he was my first employer, actually. He's a heck of a boss.
I always believe that the church ought to be involved in some kind of business outside where we could hopefully, when we started, even with the Discovery program, we had kids that we used to give $8 a week stipend money to just to keep them out of the drug traffic. And we had the ice cream parlor down at the mall, and we tried to keep kids out of trouble by just giving them a little money so that the drug folk won't get them on the corner and have them go hustling drugs. I love trying to help kids find themselves, and even adults that gets in trouble. We use those programs as counseling. They can go there and work off their time when they need a place to report to. They can come there and work out their community service time.
I think the printing company and the fact he has his love for history worked together to help him have a resource to document things that he knew would be important when they didn't matter much to anybody else. So he has a great love for not only the history of our church, but history in general. And documenting that in a way so that years gone by, people won't miss out on at least knowing a little bit about the people whose lives he's attempted to chronicle. And what has impressed me so much is that when he did the cartoon kind of book, coloring book, that in a more simple medium, he was still introducing very heavy information to people. And some folks might not have ever picked it up if it looked like a textbook, but they were willing to take a look at it because it was made simple enough. It was a parable in a coloring book, so to speak, to get people to look at the lives of some of the greatest people in our city and greatest people in our nation. And he was always coming up with visionary ideas, and he tried in his own way. And our hope and prayer is that as time goes on, people will see how important his investment in understanding the community has been.
I was quite young when I got married, and I married my wife. She attended our church, and we went to Attucks High School together. And I got married at 18 years old, and at that time we were traveling, singing with the Brown Inspirational Singers, and we were going to California for the first time, but I decided that I was not going. I was going to stay here and get married and go to work, and that's what I did. And so I've been doing the work ever since I was 18 years old. I went to work and stayed here at home and started my family.
We live next door to Melvin. So what we tried to do was we would go to church in the morning and we would not come home until late at night. All of us would pack up in that car. So to me, those are memorable moments where we didn't fuss. You had to go to church. You'd go to church or go to school as long as you lived up under them.
I look back to all my music lessons and tennis matches, and Dad was never there. Even when I was down at IU, they would have Father's Days, and Dad was never a guy that attended a lot of the kids' stuff, and it took me a while to get over that, to tell you the truth, because I said, "Man, what's up with my dad? Everybody else's father's here, and Dad's doing church stuff." But now that I'm older, I completely understand what he was doing. He had to do what he had to do in order for us to do what we were doing. We couldn't have played tennis or music lessons or IU, in my case, without him taking care of the flock of this church.
I think he comes in the house and say, "Hi, Laura. Hi, children." And that's about all they get. But they know he loves them. And he does. And he loves his grandchildren and even great-grandchildren.
And I think he would say, if he had known that being a grandfather was going to be so much fun, he would have probably tried to do that first. And so we see a whole different side of him as he matures in this role as elder, not only in the community, but in the family.
All of my children are dear to me, and my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, they are super children. They're different than all the rest of them. I think we needed, even with my wife, we needed the attention that we give to the great grandchildren is greater. There is nothing like grandchildren and great grandchildren. I thought I loved my grandchildren, but these great grandkids, they know how to make you really love them indeed. And it's such a difference in the way they think today than the even my children and my grandchildren. They all demonstrate love. They all love me, and we love them back. And they're happy in our home. They love to come to our home, and they love me better than anybody in the whole world. I think it's if you don't have any children, you ought to get you some and some great grandchildren to go along with it. Moselle and I and Patrick Chavis, the father, we were at a restaurant with some white lawyers in Colfax, Indiana, eating fish. And of course, you know how leisurely you are there. And we spent the evening there, I guess almost to Colfax Fish Market closed, talking about the conditions and in the race in our city. These were attorneys. And when we arrived home, everybody was crying. We arrived, at that time I was living in the apartment adjacent to the sanctuary. And when I went in, everybody was crying. And of course they said, "You don't know that Dr. Martin Luther King has been assassinated." And so they told us the story. Uh, but we were at work at that time, Moselle, Reverend Sanders, and I, and we were there trying to work on the open occupancy bill they was working on and trying to see what maneuvering we could do through the representatives down at the State House. Well, I think we've made great strides in our city. We never took apart in these demonstrations like other cities did. We always worked together to try to make changes in our city. One of the sad things is that we lost all of our businesses that were on Indiana Avenue. See, Indiana Avenue used to be a haven for black business. Every business down there was almost owned by black people except the pawn shops, barber shop, watch shops, makers, and restaurants. John's Chili Parlor, Ike's Beans Soup, and we missed the business part. Barber shops, beauty shops, dressmakers. They were all on the avenue, and I guess integration along with the changes that was happening and the lack of being able to finance their businesses. It just closed up Indiana Avenue far black business is concerned. And that's one of the sad things that came out of this integration situation and the advancement that had been made by our race. We used to have doctor's office, dentist's office. They were all located downtown on Indiana Avenue, down through Bragg Street, even the Cotton Club and all these clubs of entertainment. They were movie show, Indiana Theater, the Lido, where we went as kids. These were black businesses on Indiana Avenue. I know now that I must move off the scene, but I'll still be around, not as pastor, but just hopefully watch the church grow and flourish and go to another level that I am not able to take them to now because times are changing and churches are changing. Everything about the church has changed. And so I'm ready to go and let this next generation go forward.
Preach and teach, and then watching the way he behaved at home, that he did demonstrate a commitment to people, a love for people, a willing to do anything that he could within his own means to help people move forward. And when he sang, you knew that he was singing a testimony. It wasn't just words to a song. And so the song that always comes back to me, even now, is Without God I Could Do Nothing. And he could sing that song and make the rafters of the church shake. But more than that, he made my spirit shake. Things that I knew in my flesh that I could never, ever do. He taught me to believe that with God I could do them. And to give me a kind of confidence in my ability, not as Brenda, but in my ability as God's child. And that has never, ever left me. And I got to the place where I could recognize that God's voice was speaking to me through my brother, my pastor.
But it said, without God, I could do nothing. Without him, I would fail. Without him, my life would be rugged like a ship without a sail. That's it.